Hey everyone, and welcome back. Now today I want to talk about Bitcoin and kind of what we've seen so far in the cycle. I know we're all anxiously awaiting alt season. We've also seen some staggering gains lately. I know we're trying to think, well, kind of where are we at? Where does this put us in the cycle? What does this all look like? Things like that. And so what I'm seeing is it looks to me like we might be 100 days away from alt season really kind of kicking off in full force. So I want to talk about that. I want to talk about what all the gains we're seeing now are and how to best position yourself for when we see an altcoin season. Like I said, potentially in 100 days from now, obviously not an exact science, but based on what we're seeing, that's what it looks like it could be. So starting out, let's look at crypto bubbles and what we can see on the year. Obviously, we've had a fantastic year already so far, right? But ultimately, I mean, I don't really think we've started to see anything in terms of some of the ridiculous gains that could come. Bonk, if you saw this earlier in the year, like probably March, April timeframe, I think this was up like 7,000% on the year. So, I mean, we've seen some insane gains coming this year, and I think it's only going to continue. We can see Bitcoin here itself up about 150% on the year as well. So I mean, very, very strong year for just crypto overall. But I do think like we realistically have not seen an alt season like we probably would expect so far. And so I want to kind of look into that a little bit closer, see kind of how that could potentially shape up, all that type of stuff. So moving on, I want to take a look at the Bitcoin chart, because what we can see is it looked like we might have been following this kind of like trend line here. If we kind of pull this down, we could kind of see something along these lines kind of forming overall. However, we have since kind of really gapped up, and we're now almost kind of following a almost parallel trend line, but just at a higher level. And so, what we could see here is by the end of 2025, or by the end of 2024, excuse me, we could have seen on this lower trend line prices of around $83,000, $84,000. Right now, though, we're going to be looking at, even before the end of the year, we're going to be well over 100,000 if we follow this trend line. I mean, this only goes through December 22nd. We're looking at about 102,000 Bitcoin. If we were to pull this out toward the end of the year, probably follow something kind of like that, I would say, we'd be seeing something around 106,500 by the end of the year. So overall, things looking really good. I think 100,000 by the end of the year is looking definitely very, very possible. It was honestly even looking though like, we could have potentially seen 100,000 by the end of November. Obviously, we touched 99,500, so we got super, super close, but we haven't actually seen it hit 100,000 yet. I do think it's very possible that we do see this happen in December. Maybe not though. I mean, no one ever really knows for certain what's going to happen, but overall things still looking pretty strong for Bitcoin, I would say, kind of as a whole. And so nothing really to be too concerned about. We can see volume kind of gone nuts on Bitcoin. It kind of like everything in crypto. I mean, it all kind of starts in Bitcoin, which is why I think we're seeing a lot of this, but we can see, things looking really good so far. We are seeing a little bit of a pullback back into the, out of the overbought range within RSI, which I do think is probably a relatively good thing as long as we can kind of continue on this uptrend. I think that's a really good thing that we can see. Overall, I think Bitcoin's sitting in a really good spot. Now, the next thing I want to take a look at here is kind of comparing bull markets, because this is where, at least for what I'm seeing, we've got about 100 days to go, if you ask me, before we kind of start to see really crazy things kick off in the alt market. And so first off, I want to kind of explain what we're looking at here, show the chart, all this type of stuff. We can see these are essentially how price has tracked for all eras 2, 3, 4, and 5. So essentially after each halving since Bitcoin has existed, this is how each halving has performed in terms of percentage. And then that percentage is essentially mapped onto today's price. So for example, we could see if we followed era 2 exactly, we'd be sitting at about a $3.25 million Bitcoin. If we followed era 3 kind of at its all-time highs, we'd be seeing just over $1 million Bitcoin. And then if we followed last cycle at its all-time highs, at this point in time, we'd be seeing about a $245,000 Bitcoin. But if we go all the way over here where we hit all-time highs, we'd be seeing about $265,000 for Bitcoin overall. So that's kind of what we're looking at here. Again, this is mapping percentages and putting it kind of in perspective with what we've got now. As we can see, price sitting at 96,000, so behind where we would have been kind of in every other previous cycle. But if you do look, I mean, other than kind of this little bit of an aberration that we saw here on era 4, where we saw it actually outperforming era 3, this never happens, right? It's always kind of been lower than the last, except for a couple very, very like short-term situations that we have seen here. But overall, if you look at kind of where the peaks come in, peaks definitely lower every single time than the previous. So I do think that it's possible we see peaks lower. I think this is probably, at least for me, this is an expectation. I don't think we get up to the 250,000 range or wherever this is. I think where highs are sitting at, 245,000. I don't think we're going to get that high. I think, even if we crack 200,000, I'd be very pleased overall. I don't even think we'll get there. But again, this is not financial advice. I don't have any idea what the future holds for Bitcoin. I mean, we could see $1 million Bitcoin. Who knows? Again, I really doubt it, but it could be possible. The reason I like using this chart, though, is because we can kind of see how these cycles perform, and they usually all do kind of about the same thing. We can see that they all run up, they all hit their highs generally, or I guess I should say the first part of the cycle highs, because era 4 kind of broke that for us. But they hit their highs anywhere between 288 and let's say like 344 days after the halving. Obviously, we have this kind of anomaly over here from 2024 where we actually broke all-time highs before the halving, which I think this is why we've seen such a strong pullback here, is because generally after the halving, it's pretty much been almost up only in every previous cycle other than this one. However, what we have seen is in era 2, we saw a pretty long pullback after we hit this kind of first high. In era 4, we kind of saw a very similar, run up, and then we saw a pretty decent pullback here before we continued to move on. Same thing on era 3. It was only very momentary, but we did see a pullback. What I'm seeing here with era 5 is because we hit our previous all-time highs and had this massive run up prior to the halving, I think this kind of pullback was essentially just kind of shifted forward. So, all of this that we saw in previous cycles actually just got kind of moved forward. And so with that being said, we could be closer to all-time highs than what we previously would have imagined. I kind of don't think that'll be the case, just because I think just given the cycle and timing and all of this type of stuff, what we're seeing on macro and things like that, I think we'll probably still see a cycle here, a top out kind of here at the same point in the cycle. We can see we are on day 195. So if we were to hit an early top, we could be at about 288, which would be about 90-ish days from now. If we were to hit kind of this the era 3 top, that'd be about 293, again, about 100 days from now. And then if we were to hit highs like we saw in 2021, that'd be about 344 days. So about, 150 days from now, so about 5 months. I think this is going to be late, especially since, kind of we talked about how this may have been kind of pulled forward a little bit. I do think that we're not going to see such a late cycle here. I do think probably kind of following era 2 and era 3, we are going to see something kind of between the 288 to 295-ish day range, somewhere around here. That gives us about 100 days from now, where essentially we can expect Bitcoin to continue to lead the way. However, after we see this in every cycle, once Bitcoin tops, it essentially just continues to drop back. Now, this piece generally of the market right here, this is when alts go nuts. And this is anywhere between, on these, it's like 288 to maybe, let's say, like 480 days roughly, similar type of thing. And then here we really start to see some major fall offs in terms of crashes. We see one here, we see one here, we see one kind of like all through here overall. I mean, there's a lot, basically a long time. And then we start to see the very slow recovery coming up into the next halving. And so I think we're probably going to see something very similar, maybe about 100 days until we kind of see Bitcoin top out, and then from there we'll see maybe another 100 to 200 days maybe, where we see Bitcoin essentially bleed to alts, and then everything crashes, and then we see essentially Bitcoin dominance continue to rise until we hit the next halving, and so the cycle continues. That's kind of what I'm seeing here. If we look at Bitcoin price temperature, we can see something relatively similar as well. We can see that Bitcoin price temperature is starting to kind of climb up and do this like semi-parabolic run that we've seen in all the previous cycles. However, what we can't see is we are only sitting at about 3.5 when we talk about Bitcoin price temperature. In all of the previous cycles, we've hit into like the 7 range. Here we just barely broke over 7. Here we hit like up to like 9. So, I don't think we'll be hitting 9. 7 maybe I think is possible. I do think we can see even before, we did hit into 6 multiple times. And so I do think us getting up into like the 6 range is probably pretty doable, maybe even 5. Regardless, 5 or 6, I'm not going to essentially like take a super strong stance on it's going to hit one or another. But regardless, what we're seeing is, we still have a ways to get to either 5 or 6. So I do think there is going to be some more kind of move ups to come. We have broken through kind of what we saw earlier on in the year when we saw a little bit of a run. Even these, like we've kind of broken past all of the like mini run-ups that we've seen. The only thing we haven't broken past is some of these like blow off top type of like Bitcoin going nuts type of runs. And so this is, I think, what we're looking to see kind of coming into the last part of the Bitcoin dominance heavy cycle. If you ask me, again, not financial advice, do your own research, all this type of stuff. This is just kind of what I'm seeing in the charts right now. But hopefully, just given the data that I've shown you, you can kind of see why there could be an argument that within the next 100-ish days or so, we do see Bitcoin start to top out, and that's when we really start to see alts really kick off, and that's when things go nuts. So I don't know about you, I'm very excited for alt season. Alt season is usually very fun. It's very, very risky as well, but it is kind of a little bit of fun also. So overall, I think the market moving as it does, it's kind of on schedule, on course for kind of what we've seen in the past. If it continues exactly, usually, history never repeats, but it does rhyme. So I think we might see kind of maybe its own little twist or its own little flavor of essentially showing us the same thing, but in a slightly different way that we may not completely be able to expect or predict. So hopefully you found the information in this video useful. If you did, please do give me a like and subscribe, because it really does help me out. Also, if you have any comments, questions, concerns, anything like that, please feel free just to drop those in the comment section below. I do try to read and respond to all of those. If you have anything you want me to see, that'd be a really great way to do so. Also, if you are looking to trade Bitcoin or Ethereum or any of these other things, feel free to use my Margex link. Like I said, no KYC, no VPN, up to 100x leverage if you are interested in doing leverage, and $10,000 in deposit bonuses. So anyway, thank you guys for tuning in. We'll see you in the next video.